So, you want to know how to get paid what you deserve? Well, you are in the right place because today on Rich Social Worker, I'm talking to corporate leader turned social worker, Dr. Carol Lucas. Now, having worked in very high-ranking male-dominated spaces while in corporate America for the first 20 years of her life, Carol knows how to speak the language of corporations. So part of what we talk about is what professionals need to understand and do to improve their salary negotiations at the table. Now, on this channel, we talk about money, mindset, and motivation, and I promise you will get all of the above from my conversation with Carol. But you might need to dedicate some time to hear her out. As you'll see, Carol is a master educator, and she uses examples and storytelling to make many of her points. It's a conversation jam-packed with valuable content, so I split it up into multiple episodes that you'll want to be sure to watch as well. Now, I'll be back in part 2 to set up the next part of the interview, but do me a favor and like this and the subsequent videos so that YouTube's algorithm can show it to more people who also want to get paid for what they're worth. Now, are you ready to get that money? Let's go. Welcome to Rich Social Worker, the channel.
Thank you. I'm glad to be
here. I've got, my viewers are always really interested in the conversations that I have with people. And I reached out to you because we have a mutual friend, and I had asked her about, well, she had mentioned, I should say, that you had really helped her with her money mindset, especially in the way of, asking for your value within a work situation. And I know you're a trained social worker as well. And it's been important for me to highlight social workers who do have, a wealth mindset and who are money conscious or wealth conscious, because I want social workers to see themselves. And, I think it's just so important. So I would love to hear a little bit about you and about, your journey into this consciousness. And we'll talk about too, maybe where you see opportunities for social workers to shift their mindsets as well. Some of the things that we get wrong, we spoke before, so I'm excited to have my audience hear what we talked about.
Mm-hmm. So thank you. I'm really glad to be here. I was really surprised to get the outreach from my friend saying, she had spoken with you, and she said, I think that you need to really go on this show and talk about what you help me with. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm unusual in the social work field in that I'm a change-a-lifer, meaning that I came to the profession midlife. So I came to the profession in my early 40s. So my undergraduate degree is in economics and finance. So I have a background in that area, and I worked in corporate environments for over 20 years. And my last job was kind of my awakening. I would say that I had an epiphany. Some folks said she lost her mind, that I stepped away from a very
There's a thin line.
Yeah, exactly. But a lot of I came from a very, a poor working class family. So I always say I was born with a blue collar around my neck. So that's really my lens through which I have looked through a lot of things, particularly when it comes to equity, inclusion, social justice issues. I also, I'll talk about my teaching in a minute, but so I worked at this one company that was the company had emerged as an opportunity from when the managed care started to penetrate into the medical market. So prior to managed care, some of us old folks remember we had just old-fashioned indemnity plans.
I remember that, yeah.
Right? 80%, you pay 20, give
Absolutely.
them $10 cash, and you're out the door. So when managed care started to penetrate the market, they used a lot of fear tactics with doctors to get doctors on board, saying, well, if you don't sign up with us, the doctor down the street is going to get all your patients. So doctors were just jumping on board with these managed care programs. And the managed care programs were saying, we'll double your patient load, but not telling them, but we're going to cut your fees significantly. So what I found was that doctors weren't making less money. They were seeing many more patients. I had worked at the time as an office manager for a spine surgeon, and the director of the administrative director had started her own practice, her own business, where she was negotiating contracts for doctors with managed care programs. And she managed to keep a bunch of doctors out of managed care by negotiating directly with the patients. And so a lot of what I did was to bill and recover money that was probably lost in the system, because managed care companies tend to reject automatically every nth claim. Thinking that, and the mindset, and this might sound like a conspiracy theory, but that, it takes a lot to get it reviewed, get it paid. So even if one person walks away from that claim, one practice walks away from that claim, the managed care company keeps that money, they recoup that money. So what we would do in her company, I went along with her and started working with her, is we would review all of the claims that a medical practice had rejected. And we would go back in and we would resubmit for an appeal. And what we were finding is that these claims were being rejected either because there was requests for additional information, or the coding had gotten so complicated that people didn't know how to code anymore. They weren't made aware of unbundling as opposed to bundled types of services. So sometimes people, your audience may get a claim that said, this is a bundled service. And that just means that they think it's included in something else, right? So she started this company, and what she would do is she had a contract with providers where she would recoup 50% of whatever, she would get 50% of whatever they recouped. So you can imagine the amount of money that was found and recouped back. In the meantime, she then would go into, she would have these contracts with providers where she would go in and reorganize their offices. And that's what I would do. So I would go in and study all of their systems. Now, many of these doctors had, Aunt Sally down the street who was just there, as a receptionist. So as managed care billing became more and more complicated, there was this need to have professionals trained in that area. So I would go in, I would study the different efficiencies and the workflow, do workflow analyses of these companies, and then make recommendations for changes. So I worked with this company for a really long time. What we were doing, though, is doctors were getting wealthy, managed care companies were recouping money. And what I found was the patient was being caught in the middle. So what do I mean by that? So as they transitioned to managed care, you had some people who had indemnity plans. You had some that were on HMOs. You had, let's say Dr. A would bill a surgery, a spinal surgery, which could be upwards about $30,000, $40,000 for the doctor fee to bill. Patient A, let's say, had a $40,000 bill, but they had a $20,000 copay. So they would wind up with an $8,000 bill from the doctor. Patient B would have the same surgery, but the doctor would only get $12,000 from the HMO and couldn't bill the patient anything. So my job was becoming that I had to sue patient A for the $8,000 to collect the $8,000. Now, if you know anything about spinal surgery, most folks who have spinal surgery, or a good portion of them, are people who use their bodies for work. So their bodies wear out. So once they have spinal surgery, oftentimes they cannot return back to the job that they had. So they had to apply for disability, which we know takes at least a year before you can even apply. And that program is just ridiculous to get on there. Or, they would have to decide between their homes, or they would have to, make these really hard decisions. How do I pay this doctor bill? So I also knew loopholes in that system. I also knew that if you write a letter to a doctor and you send them $5 in a check and you say, if you accept this payment, then that is an agreement that you accept this payment plan and I will pay you $5 a month until this is paid off. Most processing centers don't look at the letter. They just throw the check in to be cashed. So legally, that is a binding contract. So what I would do is I would work with patients. So I was kind of
you were a double agent. Yeah.
Because every patient that I saw that had a spinal surgery reminded me of my father, who was a mechanic, who suffered from knee problems and back problems and all kinds of things. And I knew my parents, if they ever had a bill like that, it would devastate them. It would bankrupt them. So what I would do is I would have to sue these people in civil court. So days or even few nights before this, we would have to appear in small claims court, or sometimes it was even larger than that. I would work with these people to show them, how to either fight back, how to come up with an agreement. If you've ever had a medical procedure, you get tons of paperwork. You get bills that you're like, I don't know what this means. So I would explain to people, this is what this means. This is what you have to pay. This is where you can negotiate. This is the language that you can use so that you can work, you have some kind of leverage in this situation. So one day I'm in my office and I'm working with this old Italian couple. The guy comes in with a walker. They've got a paper shopping bag full of bills, and I'm just laying them all out. And at the time I was doing very well financially. I had, the right zip code, the kids who suffered from what my mother calls affluenza. My mother was appalled, because my mother's like, you're making all this money and your children are they don't know the value of things, had the boat and all that stuff. And my boss, who was the CEO of the company at the time, I was the vice president of operations. She walks by my office and then comes back in and looks in, and she calls me out and she says, what are you doing? I said, well, they have court, in 2 days, and I want to help them prepare when they show up in court. So this way they're just not overwhelmed and they're not going to get railroaded. And she looks at me. She said, you don't work for them. She said, you work for me. You're not their social worker. She said, don't do that. And I said, I don't think it's right. I said, I have this real problem. Now, my friend, who was the CEO, also grew up poor with me. Her father was a mechanic. So we both came from the same background, but we came at this with different lenses, right? She swore she would never clean another toilet again. She would never be poor again. So although she understood why I did what I did, she said, no, you can't, in essence, be a double agent. It wasn't unethical because that profession didn't have published ethics. So I wasn't violating anything. So at the same time, I only had a bachelor's degree, and all of the staff that worked for me all had MBAs. And my boss said to me, you have to go back for a master's. You've got to. I can't have all these people working for you and, not knowing that knowing that you don't have a master's. So I said, the thought of going back for an MBA was just, I just couldn't stomach it. I said, I don't want to do that. She said, I don't care if you go back for a basket weaving, just go get a degree, a master's. So I had a professor that I had kept in contact with from my undergraduate days. And we had lunch one day and he said to me, I said, I have this dilemma. I've got to go back to school. There's nothing I want to do. So he said, well, what do you love doing? He said, what would you do that you would do even if you weren't paid for it? And at the time I did a lot of volunteer work. So I would go to a nursing home and I would visit residents that were in the nursing home that had been abandoned by their family or had no family. So to give them a sense of connection, I worked with Island Harvest. I had a big old Suburban. So I had a huge car, very big carbon footprint. And I would go and pick up food from restaurants and drop them off at shelters Friday afternoons. And to me, that would help me transmute the bad karma that I had all week long going on. So I was doing a lot of volunteer work. So I said to my professor, I said, I love the volunteer work that I do. I said, but that's not paid work. I said, I love working with people. I said, I love connecting them, with services. And he said, well, you could be a social worker. I said, a social worker. I said, to me at the time, I had a very narrow view of what a social worker is. I said, no, I said, come on. I said, first of all, I can't be throwing peanut butter sandwiches out the back of a van at homeless people. I said, that's just not me. I said, and there's no way I would ever rip a child out of the arms of somebody at 2:00 in the morning, with police there. I said, I can't do that. I said, and forget about locking me on a ward with crazy people. So all of the stereotypical things I thought about social workers, which was very narrow, which we know in the fields, people just don't really understand that it's really it's a vocation that covers a lot of fields. So he said to me, it's that, but it's so much more. And then I said, yeah, but they dress terrible. I said, look at the clothes they wear. I said, they wear lots of beads and they got that wild hair. I said, in those flowing dresses. And at the time, I was of the mindset because, and that's a whole nother issue, is how women are raised to commodify themselves and objectify themselves and use their bodies as a source of power in their connection with men. And that's how they really get their powers, through their relationship with men, for a lot of women. And in this field, that was the case, because we worked with a lot of doctors who were very handsy, and we were very good looking women who wore very tight clothes and knew that doctors, or men, the types of men that we were dealing with, didn't expect much from women. So we were able to get these contracts in a way, but using that kind of feminine power to be able to manipulate these contracts and talk these men into giving us contracts for a good amount of money. We had this one contract with this one physical therapist that we work with. He goes, you ought to rename this country GLAC. And we said, GLAC. He goes, yeah, great looking, angry chicks. He said, because you're all great looking and you're all angry. But we knew instinctively, and really because of the societal grooming and the conditioning, that was our only way through power. So this was like the late 80s, mid 80s into the 90s. So I said to him, I don't know, let me think about it. And then I started looking at different schools, and I didn't want something that was totally clinical. Right. Because I found that I needed something where I could learn to use the skills I already had. Because for me, that side, wealthy people have all of the skills and all of the power. But on the other side, there's not a whole lot of people with experience and skills like me. There's a lot of people who come up through the schools of social work and in through agencies of social work. But the social work school doesn't really provide, I believe, social workers with that business background, that administrative background that they need. It's wonderful. The focus is on human services, but in order to compete with, or I would say to battle the other side, because I do see it as that, you need to have their mindset. You need to understand what motivates them. So for instance, if you want to have in a neighborhood, let's say, build an after school program, okay, in a neighborhood that, let's say, has an other side of the tracks, and every neighborhood has it, particularly on Long Island. Long Island is the most segregated place in the world, I believe, in just the way the whole island is set up. And every town has an other side. So let's say you want to build an after school program, and you want residents to approve that. The other side, the wealthy side, really has all the power. And the way we gerrymander districts and the way the power is distributed, you're never going to you have to get those people on your side, right? So we say co-opting, right? Those folks, you cannot appeal to their sense of what children need. Right? Because I don't really believe there is absolute true altruism. You always get something from it. So what you have to do is appeal to what motivates them.
Mhm.
So the fact that these children, let's say on the other side of the tracks, whose parents are working 2 jobs, need a place to go after school, they don't care. That's not they're not their children. It's not their concern. However, if you say to them, if we need to build this because all these kids after school are going to be running the streets, and they could be robbing your house, they could be, so you appeal to their fear, and we see that going on now. And then they'll say, oh yes, we have to build this. So knowing what motivates wealthy people, or where the wealth is centered, is really important. And that's not something we're trained in. We're not trained at all. So very, very long story short, I went to social work school. I quit my job. My boss was so angry with me. Now backstory to that, we grew up together. So I've known her since we're like 3 years old. She was so mad at me. She gave me a nice bonus when I left. My children, I said, look, things have got to change. I said, we're not going to have the money that we had before, because I was walking away from a huge salary. And I said, we have to pay her back. Now, at the time, my youngest daughter was in a play, Annie, and she was like the left orphan on the second left orphan in the troupe. So in her mind, we were going to be poor like that. She's like, are we going to have to live in our car? Are we going to have to wear like really awful clothes? And I'm like, no, that's not the case. But my kids were young enough at the time that I was able to also shift them and their thinking. And so I just dove right into social work. And I think I'm not making today what I left that salary, but my worst day in social work is still better than my best day in working in corporate. And I've been able to, I think, share that knowledge, share those ideas, and share that sense of, just because we're social workers doesn't mean that we have to, when they say walk the walk, it doesn't mean we have to live in those spaces. We can have a really nice living and still do good work. So therein is where I find I'm helpful to my colleagues in helping them understand you deserve to make a living for what you do. Why are our salaries so low? Because we work for the most part with people that other people, wealthy people, don't care about. So they don't want to pay anything for those people. And those people, and I say that with quotes, and they don't want to pay for the people who work with those people. So we are put in positions where we have to take crumbs and we have to take scraps. And I just don't think that's acceptable. I really don't think it is. And you're only going to get crumbs and you're only going to get scraps if you take them.
So I agree. Wait, just a moment for round of applause. So what is the antidote then? Because I personally believe, I'm in a lot of social work or spaces where social workers are, and there is a lot of complaint that, they don't pay us. And I've been of the mindset, since I've been conscious of my money mindset, that, a lot of the onus is on social workers to, just like you said, not take what we're given, like command higher, and also understand our value and what we're bringing to the table. So I would love to hear how you articulate that for yourself and what you've been able to do, and like how you helped our mutual friend, understand this as well.
The one thing that I noticed about all of that, what you said, it's not social workers.